Hey guys, got a video here for you today on the AirMaks Krait, and in this one what we're going to be doing is just giving you a little overview of the rifle. This particular model is the Krait L with the slightly longer bottle, slightly longer barrel and shroud, and obviously this is a sub 12 rifle in 177 caliber. Before we begin, I do just very briefly want to mention that this rifle was purchased by us using our own money. The rifle itself was bought from Crawley Surplus Store, who deal directly with the UK importer for AirMaks. I'm not quite sure why, but we have had some people assume that we get the rifles for nothing, or that we're somehow sponsored by manufacturers, and I just wanted to say to date that's not the case. All the rifles that you've seen on the channel up until now have been either purchased by us or borrowed off of close friends. That isn't to say that we won't do sponsored content in the future, but up until this point the channel's been 100% independent. The current plan for the channel is just to buy a few different guns, make a few videos on each of them, see what interest we get and see what interests us. The first one of those rifles was the Eurogan, so we've done a few videos on it. We've now moved it on and we've bought the Krait in its place. With that all said and done, we can begin on the overview. So first we'll go through some of the things I dislike about the rifle, then we'll go through some of the things I like, and then finally we'll talk about how we got on at the range and just give you some real world results. So there's only really a couple things that I dislike about the Krait, so we'll get them done nice and quickly. The first is the little Picatinny rail at the front here. I did have this problem with the FX Impact as well. If you mount a bipod to this Picatinny rail and then shoot off a bench with it, what tends to happen is the rifle seesaws in the middle there and it doesn't give you a very stable platform. Luckily there is a very simple solution, and it is one of these front rails here. So if we mount this to the bottom of the rifle, it brings the bipod right out and to the front of the bottle. And when you're shooting off a bench using a bipod, it makes the rifle 10 times more stable. So in my opinion at least, if you're shooting this rifle off a bench, you're going to definitely need to pick up one of those extended front rails. The second thing I'm not too keen about is the cheek piece at the top here. The cheek piece itself is just a thin piece of plastic, which isn't a bad thing on its own, although if you do have to raise the cheek piece up off the body of the rifle, it does tend to be a little flimsy. Luckily, I could keep the cheek piece down flat on the body of the rifle, so I didn't have that problem. My only other real complaint is that the rifle itself doesn't come with a dust plug for the fill port for probably 50 pence worth of Delrin. It would have been nice to have one included with the rifle. But apart from that, there is really nothing else that I can really grumble with or have any major complaints with. The actual fit and finish of the rifle is really nice. The safety is a little spongy, but that doesn't detract from the way it works. It's a total trigger lockout, so with the rifle in safe, you can't pull the trigger blade whatsoever. The last thing I will mention is that the top rail, the part that we mount our scope on, does have 20 MOA of adjustment. So just like the Eurogan, I did need to use adjustable mounts to get the scope zeroed. With that all said and done, that's all the dislikes that I have on the rifle. And we'll move on to the more positive aspects of the rifle. So the actual rifle itself I'm really quite happy with. The fit and finish of everything is really quite nice. The actual operation of the rifle is nice and silky smooth. I don't quite know how they've got it so nice, but it certainly is a pleasure to shoot. And my personal favourite thing is that someone has actually made a rifle that fits me just perfect. So the back here is obviously extendable, and at its maximum adjustment there, the rifle is absolutely perfect. The grip's nice and thick, so it's nice and comfy to shoot from, and the actual buttstock here pulled out to its maximum length. The length of pull is absolutely perfect. Off the bench, this thing is a real pleasure to shoot, and I do just want to give AirMaks big props for actually getting the length of pull right. Now, I am probably just going to swap out the grip anyway, but it is nice to see from standard that they don't fall into the trap like the Impacts do, and just include a super skinny grip in the box. I'm probably going to swap over to an Ergo one. This one here is quite nice as it's got the palm shelf on the bottom, and it does make the rifle look fairly unique. However, if you didn't want to go down that route, the factory grip is perfectly serviceable. Moving on from that, the trigger of the rifle is really quite nice. It is a linkage trigger, being a bullpup, which means from the trigger blade itself, there is a linkage rod which runs down to the bottom here, connected to a couple sears, which latch on the hammer obviously. But the trigger itself is really quite nice. A nice short first stage and a nice crisp second stage. From the factory it did have a hair of creep, but just a quick adjustment in the back there sorted that out. Moving on for that is the barrel and the shroud. So the rifle itself is fairly quiet, although it does benefit from a mod. Whilst we're here, I will mention that the Krait L, this model here, does have a 500mm long barrel, whereas the Krait Compact, or just the Krait Standard, has a 400mm long barrel. They are obviously both CZ barrels, and I'm not quite sure what magical fairy pixie dust they use to make them, but whatever it is, it certainly works well. I'll show you the groups very shortly. The last thing I want to do though is just show you the hammer and how that works in the back here. So here we have a levered hammer with the hammer spring down here and the pivot point of the hammer here. If you look in this little chamber here, we see the hammer and the strike point of the valve. The valve itself is just a standard knockoff valve, and as we pull the cocking arm back, this hammer mechanism here locks on the sear here. And then if we were to fire the rifle, the sear drops off, the hammer is able to fly forward and hit the valve, so this part here. So you can see that there. It works incredibly well. The other thing, while we've got the cover off, I do want to mention that this rifle is a 177 and it doesn't come fitted with the anti-double load system. I believe in the 177s it proved quite temperamental, so they decided to take it out to stop the magazine from jamming up, although I believe it is fitted on the 22s. What we'll do now is just talk through some of the real world testing that we've done on the rifle and how we got on with it generally. So unfortunately at the moment the Krait does have a little bit of a bad name. If you type it up on YouTube or on some of the forums, a few people are experiencing issues with the regulator and some are complaining about creep. I will say that the retailer I bought this rifle from, Crawley Surplus Store, told me I had the latest regulator internals, although the outer housing, this black nut here, was the Gen 2 version. Now I'm not particularly sure what this all means, although I will say that the rifle itself doesn't show any major signs of creep or anything like that, and shooting the rifle normally I didn't notice anything untoward. Now I will admit that I could have been lucky with this particular rifle, although hopefully the regulator issues have been sorted out with the latest patch. With that being said though, we will obviously be taking the rifle fully to pieces, so we'll have a look at the reg and see if there's anything that we can improve or anything like that in there. With that being said though, the chrono results of the rifle are really quite good. Over a standard magazine using unweighed pellets straight out the tin, the average spread of a magazine, which is 18 pellets, was around 10. You obviously did have magazines that went outside that range, but they were few and far between, and more likely those are pellet issues rather than rifle or regulator issues. And shooting the rifle down from a 200 bar fill with the 480 bottle, I was getting just under 400 shots. That is helped obviously by the regulator on this rifle being set fairly low at around 60 bar. I haven't put a digital gauge on the regulator yet, so when we do that we will see exactly what's happening with the reg. It does seem to be working fine at the moment, but when we put a digital pressure gauge on there, we'll see exactly what's happening. With that all said and done, we'll take a look at the range results we got using the rifle. So all of these groups here were done at 50 yards, and all apart from this one and this one are 5-shot groups. At the top here we have some JSB execs, so just some 844 pellets, 5.2 head size. The next row is some JSB Express 5.1 head size. And then finally down the bottom here we have some JSB Express 5.2 head size. In our testing, JSB Expresses obviously won the group test, and as we can see down here, some real nice tight little groups at 50 yards from the Krait. Probably the best one of the day was this one at the bottom here, which looks to be about a 9.5mm group edge to edge. So obviously 177 pellet size, so 4.5mm, centre to centre, that's a 5mm group at 50 yards using a sub 12 rifle. But we were really quite lucky with this group. It was the best of the day, and we didn't have any flyers or anything like that in the group. All the others, however, apart from this one at the top here, are under a 5p piece. So a 5p piece for those outside the UK is around 18mm in diameter. And all of these groups here are well within a 5p piece at 50 yards, so really nothing to be sniffed at there. Right then, that's pretty much going to do it, so we'll bring the rifle back and I'll give you a brief rundown of what we're going to do to it. So the plans for this rifle are pretty similar to the Eurogan and other rifles we've done on the channel. We're obviously going to be making a nice shroud for it. I do want to make a telescoping shroud, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned for that. We may make a removable bottle adapter so we can stick a 580 FX bottle on it. Although AirMaks do have the removable bottle adapter listed as one of their accessories, so they may be bringing one of those out at some point. So we might not bother with that for this rifle, although we will be making a load of other stuff like a cocking handle, gauge covers, all sorts of different bits and pieces. The one thing that this rifle is crying out for is a bag rider. Now Krait or AirMaks do sell a bag rider themselves, but we're going to be making one to fit in this gap here, and that will just make the rifle a little nicer to shoot off a bag. However, that's all going to be coming in the future. So for now guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.